So let's just jump right in. So you kind of gave an overview of how you think Ohio State's doing. Have you even looked at Michigan at all? I know you know what's going on with Ohio State, but have you watched Michigan enough to feel like you have kind of an opinion on them at all?
Yeah, your quarterback makes my eyes hurt. Cade McNamara kind of reminds me. He makes me sort of. It's sort of like I'm going to compare him to like Brady Hoke. He's like that guy that's not very good, but I don't want him to lose too much because then he'll get fired. So I'm hoping that Cade can do just enough that he holds on to that job a little bit longer, because I am concerned that their backup quarterback might be good enough to get them to the promised land.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, talking about those guys, I mean, Cade is he's very steady. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed in the past few years, especially with Harbaugh, his quarterbacks, you look at them and they don't ever get better from year to year. And he usually has a different quarterback every year. No one actually improves. I think Cade is probably as unspectacular as he is. He's probably the most consistent, competent quarterback I'd say Michigan has had. I don't know, last year, in that disastrous year, they played Rutgers. I don't know if you remember hearing about that game at all, but halfway through the season, Joe Milton was completely ineffective and terrible. Had an awesome arm. He threw the ball awesome, but he just couldn't connect on any of those passes. He just couldn't hit wide receivers.
Wasn't he in the run for the Heisman in September?
Yeah. After the first game, they beat Minnesota, and it was like Heisman time. But he completely lost it. And against Rutgers was ahead 17-0 at Rutgers. And they pulled Joe Milton eventually because he threw like his fourth interception. And they put Cade in the game, and literally in maybe 2 to 3 plays, he threw a long touchdown pass, like a beautiful, perfectly thrown touchdown pass. And then he went on to score, I think, 5 touchdowns total in 2.3 quarters and overtime. He had like 4 touchdowns passing and 1 rushing, and won the game for them. And at that time, I was like, oh my gosh, they have a competent quarterback that can complete passes, and he's super accurate. But
against Rutgers,
granted, you have to look at what Joe Milton was doing at that time, 17-0, with the awesome arm. But I thought at least at that point, maybe he's not going to be great, but he's competent, and he has been competent. But take a guess. How many touchdown passes has Cade McNamara thrown this year through 7 games?
This year?
Mm-hmm.
5.
Yes, exactly. He threw 5. He scored 5 touchdowns just to get Rutgers in a second half. But this year, through 7 games, he only has 5 touchdowns. So just by knowing that, do you think that's Cade's fault, or do you think that's coaching's fault?
Well, I was going to say, first of all, I don't know if I'm going to ding him that much, since you guys run the ball 80% of the time anyway. So I don't really care how many touchdowns he has. I'd be more concerned with like what his yards per play are, and I'm guessing it's not too good, because so I mean, that's the thing. So he just needs to be able to make big plays, not necessarily touchdowns. I just don't think that Michigan has that right now, and I think they need to do what Oklahoma did and make the switch. You just need to, I'm still like, kind of a side note, but I can't believe that Caleb Williams is getting so much hype for pulling out a crazy win against Kansas of all teams. Like, that's just absurd.
Yeah, I was in the Great Wolf Lodge with my kids and at the bar there watching that game, and I was highly offended by watching that game. But it was while the Northwestern game was happening, and speaking of JJ McCarthy, I mean, that guy's got all the tools, but he's super young. Everyone, if you look around, you watch other videos, you read articles, everyone wants that guy in. He's the backup quarterback. He's probably going to be awesome.
Is he a true freshman?
Than Cade. He's an absolute true freshman. But he didn't win the job. Maybe they'll put him in at some point if Cade falters. But one thing and looking at his recruiting record, he went to IMG Academy last year, and which is an awesome powerhouse high school, and completed 58% of his passes. So that scares me a little bit. Like Cade McNamara he's got the record in Nevada, the state record in Nevada for I think for yards. He's like 11,000 or 12,000 yards he threw for. Cade McNamara, the guy who's got 5 touchdowns right now through 7 games. So I'm just a little scared about all the optimism around throwing that true freshman kid in when you've got a guy that you haven't even, it seems like they haven't even tapped Cade's potential at all based on the Rutgers game. But
so what kind of quarterback is he though? Is he a drop back or is he a dual threat?
He isn't really a dual threat. He's more of like, you could, if he left, and I don't think Michigan's going to have both quarterbacks next year. If he left, he would probably go somewhere where they have an air raid and light it up. Like I guarantee if he's got the Nevada State record passing, he would probably go somewhere and light it up. So I think you probably can understand, like you probably guessed that my thought is it's probably a lot of the coaching and the plays they're calling that's really hurting Cade right now. So that's kind of where I'm at a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, part of it too is your top receiver is out for the year, so that doesn't help things either.
No,
But
doesn't help at all. But back to
excuse everything.
Let's go back to Ohio State though, because there's a really interesting quarterback situation happening there. I mean, Stroud was a little bit shaky coming out the gate this year, but he's really come on. So what are your thoughts about him, how he's played, and what does that mean exactly for the 5-star backups on your roster right now? And do you think they'll be there?
So first, to get a baseline, let's define some terms. So shaky is how you described him. So how many yards does your quarterback generally get in a game?
About 80, 90. He's averaging about like 125 or something like that.
So his shaky game against Oregon, he had like 450 yards.
Yeah, very true.
That was a shaky game. Now he did make a few mistakes and there was a few drops, and Henderson didn't really play that much in that game, unfortunately. He hadn't taken over the full-time role yet. But it seemed like we couldn't quite break off as many of the big runs in that game as we normally would. But as far as quarterbacks go, CJ looks to be as good as any quarterback I've ever seen at Ohio State. But you still have to take some of it with a grain of salt because of the teams they played, which makes it hard to tell. And like, I'm going to actually go ahead and give, it's really hard to weight it just because you have like 3 first-round receivers. You have 2 potential first-rounders on the offensive line. You have another couple guys that are probably going to go in the 3rd round on the offensive line. I mean, it's probably the best offensive line we've ever had, and that's including ones with Orlando Pace. So you have like an offensive line with multiple first-rounders, receivers with 3 first-rounders, a tight end who was going to go in the first couple of rounds. It's just like the most talented offensive group of skill guys that I've ever seen. And then, you have a quarterback who's able to get them the ball. So Bryce Young is the leading contender for the Heisman right now, but he does lots of short passes and lets his playmakers do the work, or he just throws deep to Jameson Williams, the other guy who was the best receiver on Bama, who couldn't even get in the starting 3 at Ohio State, which is just insane about the depth. So I don't know how good Stroud is, or if it's just that he has like a best supporting cast I've ever seen around him, and it could be like the Cowboys, where, is Troy Aikman good, or is he just with, an unbelievable offensive line, tight end, receiver, and running back of all time. So like, but it doesn't mean that he wasn't also great. So I'm not sure how good he is because he has so many good people around him. It makes it tough.
It's probably safe to say he's pretty darn good, even though he does have all that talent. I would say, you can tell just by the way he passes, he's accurate. He has a lot of time to throw, granted, but they use him the right way too. The offensive coaches for Ohio State use the tools they have. They use the players they have. I think that's definitely in his favor. It's a quarterback friendly system definitely, but that's not an excuse at all. I mean, that's not saying that he wouldn't be awesome if he went to Michigan. I mean, he would probably be like, he'd probably have half the stats he does at Michigan just because of the way they would use him incorrectly.